Welcome back. Here now with a new installment of the Education First Report, CAN TV's Chief Education Correspondent Adrian Segura unpacks the CPS School Board Performance Report Card with Board Rule Editor Maureen Kelleher and Harvard Graduate School of Education's Parrott-Sheffer. Adrian.
Chicago is standing at a historic crossroads as it relates to its public schools. For decades, the mayor picked who sat at the head of the table. But now, we're in the middle of a massive experiment, a hybrid board of elected and appointed members. And in just a few months, voters will elect all 21 members of the board of one of the largest education systems in the country. But how do we know if the people sitting at those seats, elected or appointed, are actually doing the work? On this edition of the Education First Report, I'm joined by two people who have been grading Chicago's Board of Education like a final exam. Editor of the Board Rule newsletter, Maureen Kelleher, and Harvard University's Parrott-Sheffer. Maureen and Adam, welcome. Let's dive right in. Adam, let's start with you. You've created an annual report card for the board. Most parents get report cards for their kids. Why did you feel the city needed one for the Board of Education?
So that was actually the origin story of it, was I got my kid's report card and was sitting there looking at it and thinking, you know, we spend all this time grading our kids and getting all this information on their learning, and yet there's nothing happening for the people who are actually issuing this, right? And, that kind of started it for us. And I was like, I could actually do that. And, as somebody who ran for the school board, one of the things that I saw was people did not know about the board. People did not know who their person was, or this was even going to be elected, or what even the board did. And so this need to help people know this is the work of the board, and this is kind of how we're doing, just felt like a place to lean in and provide a little bit of transparency for our system.
Maureen, you've been tracking how these board members show up outside of the boardroom. Your report shows that between January and September, two board members, board member Boyle and Smith, made 32 visits to schools each, while others were barely hitting double digits. I'm curious, as we're thinking about report cards, why should a parent in Englewood or Rogers Park care about how many schools a board member visits? And does it actually lead to better grades for their kids?
Well, it's very hard to draw a straight line from anything a board member does to better grades for your actual kids. But it is important for school board members to get to know their communities and set foot inside their schools, and that can be really hard to do. I'll just say two things, and then I definitely want to let Adam, who is the keeper of the data on this, say a little bit more. But two things to be aware of are, one, some people on the board have a lot more bandwidth for this than others. I think it's no accident that our retired teachers and Che Rhymefest-Smith, who's independent, are able to get out to a lot of individual schools where other board members who work day jobs and have 4 or 5 kids, it's harder for them to do it. So there's some reality in these numbers that needs to be acknowledged. At the same time, board members having a presence at the schools in their district helps them to know what's going on. It helps them build relationships with principals and communities. I know, for example, that board member Therese Boyle has said one of the things she looks for when she goes into schools is just what is the condition of the buildings? Are there repairs that are needed that maybe she can refer to somebody in central office? There's a lot of jockeying for how fast can we get repairs done? It's helpful to have somebody being an advocate for the schools in their community. And so that is something that the school visits can signal.
I also think that, Maureen's talking about this through line to the classroom, but the other piece that really matters is what's helping board members make their decisions, right? And so we have a system of 600 schools. And if you're a typical retired teacher, maybe you've been in 4 or 5 of them with a decent amount of time. If you're a parent, maybe 3 or 4. And so your decisions and what you know is really based upon this very small set of schools and experiences that might be quite dated at this point. And so what I really see from these folks who are getting into schools is they're actually starting to listen to and hear, what are the very different experiences people can have in school across our city. And so it's really important that they're kind of able to start to realize that there's what they've experienced, and then now their job is to think about everyone. I think the other thing that we note in the report card isn't just are they going, but are they going alone or are they going with other people? Because as they're making decisions, as they're wrestling with policies, there's this opportunity to actually sit there and say, hey, we were both in that school together. We saw learning that looked like this, or needs that these young people had, or infrastructure challenges. How do we make that happen, right? And so it gives them a common anchor to really think about what are the policy implications for their work, for real teachers, real principals, real schools that they've been in.
And I guess building on that, like your analysis of last quarter of 2025, it shows a pretty startling trend. You break discussion time into like 3 core buckets, right? It's governance, adult priorities, and student learning. Yeah, I'm curious, like, what's the data show us on student learning? Like, actually talk about what happens in the classroom. Is it, given it's the smallest bucket out of the work that kind of like came out of your report?
And I hope that Maureen will join me on this one and kind of talk about some of the research she's done about what school leadership looks like and where learning might fit in with the board. When we think about our particular board, one of our challenges is we aren't really clear yet on what's that North Star around what do we want in terms of learning. We've launched a 5-year plan recently that has some good stuff in it, and it would definitely be one of those kitchen sink plans that has everything in it, right? Like I've pulled out the measures, and you could not track all of these things in a year, and I'm somebody who's pretty good at tracking things. And so for the board to really say, this is what really matters for student learning. We're going to put a marker in the sand that we care about chronic absenteeism because kids need to be there, or we care about early literacy, whatever the thing is going to be, then they can really start to have conversations around how does this decision impact that particular measure. So we haven't seen a lot of that yet. I think part of it is we got to get clear about the learning that we want, and we have a board that's learning how to be a board. This has been their first year. This is our first year doing it as a city.
Right. And then I would just add that this is not what we see in this data, that governance and adult priorities are dominating and student learning is like the least discussed area. That's not unusual among school boards around the country. There is a movement sparked by a former Kansas City school board member to try to encourage boards to bring the amount of time they spend talking about student learning and outcomes up to 50%. That's like a North Star goal. That's a big jump from where most school boards are, and it acknowledges the realities that school boards do have to cover a lot of ground other than student learning. They have to deal with contracts, they have to deal with food service, they have to deal with buses. Like all the operational stuff is under their purview, and it's totally legitimate that they spend time on it. But at the same time, the buck stops with the school board for the performance of the CEO, for how budget priorities are set. And if learning is not part of that conversation, then priorities won't be aligned right, and money won't go where it's needed most.
And it gets to that point. I just want to keep us moving along. As we look ahead, actually, you name a couple of these pieces. Another factor that a lot of these board members have is that they're also running for office. Previously, we saw in the last, half election, if you will, with half board members being elected, we saw $13 million in campaign spending. For the ordinary person watching CAN TV right now, the parent who wants to run because they care about their local school, do they actually have a chance against that kind of money?
Well, the surprising answer is maybe they have an even better chance than they did last time. Adam, I'm going to fact check with you. About 30% of our current board's elected members managed to do it without
significant dollars. Yep.
Right.
Yep.
The least expensive race was about $50,000, if I recall. And this time the districts will be half as large. So we had 10 districts. We're now breaking into 20. And that means that each person running has half as many people to knock doors and half as many people to send mailers to. So the actual cost of running the race should be cheaper.
And Adam, you analyzed, kind of align with this, right? There's also kind of like the board dynamics, and you've analyzed who's doing the talking during board meetings. You found that, CTU line members dominated 73% of the discussion in board meetings. What are the big issues that you think candidates are going to have to answer for as we look ahead to the upcoming election cycle?
Yeah. So I think that first and foremost, hopefully we're still focusing this conversation on student learning, right? I think one thing that you hear regularly are that Chicago is a district that's made a lot of improvement, right? That we have record graduation rates. We have significant improvement in terms of what kids know and are able to do. And if you go into our schools, there are still a lot of schools and a lot of gaps where kids are not getting everything that they need. And so while the board has to deal with things like a superintendent search or, figuring out their governance model, I know that they're going to be asked a lot on, if you're in my neighborhood, I'm going to say, what are you doing for my baby? And what are you doing for the babies around us here? And I know they're going to get that everywhere across the city.
Right, but what that looks like from community to community will be different. I will just say I was on the phone with a mom in the back of the yards neighborhood literally an hour before I came to this conversation. And the first thing she said is, I want to know that every school in my neighborhood has a plan for what happens if ICE shows up at the door. And right now, I don't think I know that. And I know that the district has put out a lot about that, but there's a big gap between the information that's out on a website and the information that's actually in communities. So that said, what I am gathering about the key issues that people in the communities will be asking about are safety. Charter schools will be an issue, and what are people's positions on charters? And then just the basics. We're back to, who is this board member? What did you do? If you're the incumbent, what did you do for the last 2 years? If you're new, who are you and why should I vote for you? I mean, there's going to be very basic, just get to know you will be essential.
So to close this out, I'm curious if you can both share just very high level, what's one of the governance kind of habits that you think this new larger board is going to have to really lean into to be successful?
Well, we both were talking about this before. Number one is use committee structure. It's a lot easier to get stuff done when there's smaller teams taking a task than the whole board trying to do everything at once.
I'd say the other thing is they've got to get that governance thing right, where they're really focusing on what are the 2 to 4 things that the board's going to be good at, what they're going to know how to do, and track on it every single meeting.
Amazing. Well, Maureen and Adam, thank you sincerely for helping to get this critical information out to the parents and other key stakeholders. I look forward to having you back to continue the conversation. Darius?
Adrian, thank you. On the other side of the break, Center for New Horizons CEO Lakeisha McFadden joins Monica to discuss how her organization is working to create stability for Chicago families. Stay with us.